Papal visit. Pope Francis kicks off a 6-day trip to Chile and Peru. We'll give you a preview. State of panic. Tough questions after a false alarm of a missile strike this weekend sent Hawaiians into a frenzy. Day of service. The legacy of civil rights legend Reverend Martin Luther King on this, his holiday. And a new basilica in Virginia. The Vatican gives a big honor to a church outside Washington. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, January 15th, 2018. Pope Francis leaves Rome and heads to Chile, a country where the church's influence has waned in recent years due to secularization and clergy sex abuse. But the Holy Father hopes to win over minds and hearts during his 3-day visit, before then heading to neighboring Peru. On this Martin Luther King Jr. Day, thanks for joining us. I'm Jason Calvi in for Lauren Ashburn. The Pope faces some big challenges on this visit. Vandals firebombed a handful of Santiago churches. They threaten that Francis will be next. Never before has one of his trips been met with such violence and opposition. It's the Holy Father's first trip to Chile and the first papal visit since St. John Paul II in 1987. Juliet Lindley is EWTN News Nightly's Vatican correspondent. She joins us now from Rome. Juliet, tell us about some of the challenges that the Pope will face on this visit.
Yes, this is a visit to a country where, despite 6 out of 10 Chileans being Catholics, there is a lot of opposition, perhaps unprecedented. There have been protests because people are feeling a bit fed up with how the priest sex abuse scandals have been playing out. The church has lost influence and moral authority due to those scandals. And since 2010, analysts say there's been a downward spiral, particularly after victims came out saying that charismatic priest Ferdinando Caradima had been abusing them. Now, people here are increasingly secularized. The country is becoming increasingly secularized, and a lot of Catholics have been turning to the evangelical churches. And as you mentioned, several churches have been firebombed. Now, that was in protest at how the Mapuche indigenous people feel they're being treated, and they want their ancestral lands to be returned to them. So this is what awaits the Holy Father, and he has not a long time. It's a 3-day trip in which to start to at least make inroads into perhaps reversing this trend.
I know on a lot of his papal trips he visits what he calls the peripheries. Who will he be meeting there in Chile?
Indeed. So, of course, he'll be meeting the president, Michelle Bachelet, who was the first female president of Chile. He'll meet the diplomatic corps, a lot of the local authorities. He'll be meeting youths. He'll be meeting members of the clergy. But he will also be meeting members of what you can call the peripheries, so migrants, so members of the Mapuche indigenous groups. He will indeed be saying Holy Mass in Mapuche territory, and he will be meeting leaders of the Mapuche, and he will also be meeting victims of the military dictatorship. Now, it must be noted that during the dictatorship of General Augusto Pinochet, the Catholic Church was actually very, very widely respected, and it was appreciated how much it spoke out against the human rights abuses of the military. Now, there has been a sort of a change in trend there, and then the Pope perhaps will meet with survivors of clergy sex abuse.
A lot going on this trip. Juliet Lindley, our eyes and ears at the Vatican, EWTN News Nightly's Vatican correspondent. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason.
A fire damages a giant Christ statue in Peru's capital days before the Pope's arrival. Peruvians in Lima awoke Saturday to find the statue on fire. It's perched on a bluff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Police say electrical cables are to blame. And while flying to Chile, the Holy Father sent a special message to his native Argentina. The Pope writes, "As I fly over Argentinian airspace, I extend to you my warm greetings, and I send heartfelt best wishes to all the people of my homeland. Assuring them of my closeness and blessing, I ask all of you, please do not forget to pray for me." President Trump blames Democrats for derailing an immigration deal, but they say he's the one to blame after alleged racist comments made during negotiations. One of the sticking points is DACA, or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. The program allows immigrants brought here illegally as children to stay in the country. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Jason. President Trump is defending himself, saying he's not a racist. Republican Senators David Perdue of Georgia and Tom Cotton of Arkansas are backing the president. There are disputing accounts that the president used a vulgar term to describe Haiti and African nations. The controversy is threatening already fragile negotiations.
Oh, we're ready, willing, and able to make a deal on DACA, but I don't think the Democrats want to make a deal. And the folks from DACA should know the Democrats are the ones that aren't going to make a deal. We need to phase this.
Dick Durbin of Illinois, the #2 Democrat in the Senate, tells a different story. Twice last week, he met with President Trump at the White House to seek a solution on immigration. Durbin writes, Republicans and Democrats negotiated in good faith to reach a deal that gives you what you asked for in front of the country on Tuesday. It's time to lead and support the bipartisan deal. Republican Representative Mia Love, appearing on CNN, agrees both sides should come together.
There are people that are depending on us, not just Americans on border security, but families that are waiting, that are in limbo, that need something that a president can't give or take away from them.
President Trump says he'll accept the DACA deal if it includes funding for border security. His administration asked Congress for $18 billion to build the wall. The current bipartisan plan calls for $1.6 billion as a first installment. And the conversation about DACA and border security spills over into questions about funding deadlines. Congress has to agree to a new spending bill by this Friday to avoid a government shutdown. Some Democrats say they won't support a budget deal unless Republicans also agree to protect Dreamers. Jason?
Mark, that deadline to help the Dreamers really goes all the way to March.
That's right, Jason. After the president canceled DACA, he gave Congress until March 5th to come up with a solution for the Dreamers. The Secretary of Homeland Security argues that is the real deadline, not this Friday. Keep in mind, a federal judge has also temporarily blocked the president's decision to end DACA.
All right, White House correspondent Mark Irons, thank you. The House votes this week on a bill to save babies who survive abortion. It's timed around Friday's March for Life. The bill's sponsor hopes the Senate will follow suit.
This bill is necessary to protect children that are born alive during an abortion procedure. And so many people have said, you have to be able to give medical care. These babies deserve to live if they have survived an abortion.
The Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act would punish abortionists who don't help the babies. They'd face fines and up to 5 years in prison time. A Hawaii emergency management employee is reassigned after accidentally sending out an alert of an incoming ballistic missile. 2 days later, the state is still rattled. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby joins us with more on the aftermath. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Jason. The Hawaii Emergency Management Agency says the 10-year employee who sent out the false alarm has been moved to a job that does not provide access to a warning system. Many in the state have been worried in recent months about a possible attack from North Korea, but now the blunder is raising questions about whether the government can keep people informed in a real emergency.
For nearly 40 minutes on Saturday, Hawaii thought it was facing a ballistic missile threat.
It's hard to stay calm when you don't know what's happening.
A false alert was sent out about 8 a.m. statewide saying ballistic missile threat inbound to Hawaii. Seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. For 38 minutes, residents and tourists were scared to death.
There were people crying. You could see people were really frightened. I sent a message to my grandkids at home, and it made me realize, my God, I could have never seen them again.
My wife got the alert. She knew what to do.
Longtime Catholic pro-life advocate Jason Jones tells us he was taking out the trash at his home on Oahu when he got the text message. His wife and kids immediately left their house, heading for shelter in the nearby caves.
My family's plan is to get in the shadow of the Waianae Mountain Range as fast as possible. I was looking at the clock and I was keeping track of the time, and I was just thinking, I have 10 minutes to get us between the mountain and Pearl Harbor.
About the same time they arrived, they got the word it was a false alarm and took this picture in relief. Jason thanks God for the experience. He says it gave him a chance to identify with religious minorities fleeing their homes in Iraq. David Ige, the governor of Hawaii, says the false alert was totally unacceptable, and he apologizes to his community.
We are doing everything that we can immediately to ensure that it never happens again.
President Donald Trump commented on the incident for the first time Sunday night.
Their attitude and what they want to do, I think it's terrific. They took responsibility. They made a mistake.
We've also learned the incident has led to both a state and federal investigation. Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen urges Americans not to lose faith in government, saying this was a very unfortunate mistake, but these alerts are still very vital. Jason?
Well, I know many Americans are worried about a possible attack from North Korea. What are the United States officials doing about that right now?
Well, over the last couple of months, especially the state's emergency management agency in Hawaii has been retesting Cold War-era sirens. Unfortunately, this is not the first mistake for the warning system. Last month, 12 of the sirens played an ambulance siren, and then those sounds were barely audible. So there's still a lot of work to be done to make sure Hawaii's emergency systems are up to speed.
Sounds like it. Thank you so much, Wyatt Goolsby. Appreciate it very much. And North and South Korea meet for the second time in a week as worries grow over the communist nation's nuclear arsenal. The countries are hashing out details of the North's competing in next month's Olympic Games. The South sees it as a chance to calm conflict caused by the North's nuclear and missile tests. They'll come together again Wednesday, and then later this week they meet with the International Olympic Committee. A push to allow abortion in South Korea gains strength. The New York Times reports 230,000 people signed an online petition supporting abortion. South Korea allows it in a few cases, including if a woman is raped or her health is at risk. The country's constitutional court will review a case later this year that could overturn their abortion ban. A suicide bombing in central Baghdad kills at least 38 people. The blast also hurt more than 100. No group has claimed responsibility, but Iraqi security says it bears all the hallmarks of ISIS. It's the second suicide bombing in Baghdad in 3 days. Another attack Saturday killed 8 people. A volunteer group reports nearly 180 people, including 51 children, have been killed in Syria in the past 2 weeks. As the government steps up air raids on remaining rebel-held areas, the death count was announced following more strikes over the weekend. A Catholic leader in Damascus escapes death by a matter of seconds. A bomb crashed through the bed of Archbishop Samir Nassar as he was preparing for a nap. But the Archbishop left his room an instant earlier. The Catholic Herald in England reports Bishop Nassar told supporters in an email, "Thank you, Lord, for this new beginning. My life belongs to you." Thousands of Filipinos joined the 11th annual Angels Walk for Autism. The march aims to show support for people with autism. The Davao Today newspaper reports more than 1 million people in the Philippines have autism. Coming up, the dream lives on. We discuss the Christian roots of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. on this day, dedicated to the civil rights leader. And praying for relief. A makeshift memorial for the victims of last week's deadly mudslides in Southern California.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Dr. Martin Luther King speaking at the March on Washington, August 1963. 250,000 people packed in. The civil rights leader also was a Baptist minister and in 1964 won the Nobel Peace Prize. Today would have been the late Dr. King's 89th birthday. And the daughter of Martin Luther King Jr. carries on her father's legacy of peace and unity.
We are one destiny, and we are in fact one blood. For he, meaning God, has made from one blood all nations for to dwell on the face of the earth.
Bernice King spoke today at Atlanta's Ebenezer Baptist Church. Her father once preached at the same place. Vice President Mike Pence and Second Lady Karen Pence lay a wreath Sunday at Washington's Dr. Martin Luther King Memorial. On Twitter, the Vice President says Dr. King was a great American leader who inspired a movement and transformed a nation. President Trump uses his weekly address to say Dr. King's dream of a colorblind society is the American dream.
His words, his deeds, they live on forever. And the cause for which he gave his life only gains strength and force and power with the passage of time.
President Trump marks his first King holiday in office, but it's clouded by claims he used a swear word to describe African countries. And Martin Luther King was a Baptist minister and a man of faith. Our next guest says as we remember his life, we can't forget his Christian roots. Gloria Purvis of EWTN's radio's Morning Glory, thank you so much for joining us today. King began, as we know, as a preacher. He had a lot of backing from Christians as well. What does that say about his mission?
I think it tells us why they were able to endure what they endured. They believed in the eternal law, and they understood they were fighting for what would be God's understanding of the human person, that each and every one of us is made in his image and likeness, and we have that dignity because we are made in his image and likeness. And
I know his letter in the Birmingham jail, he quotes Thomas Aquinas and he says, an unjust law is not a law. As we look at the Civil Rights Society or the Civil Rights Movement right now, what can Christians do right now?
I think Christians need to first of all, reread a letter from Birmingham jail, because he does talk about when laws are just and unjust. He quotes St. Augustine. He quotes St. Thomas Aquinas. He basically says, helps us understand that a law is just when it's rooted in the eternal law and natural law. And you can never go wrong when you have that framing for understanding how we should look at what laws we have in our country today.
I guess that framing, though, it's so contradictory. I mean, people in society might not want to consider the natural law or divine law, what God has revealed as truth.
Well, I think that's where we can go astray, because the minute that we start to decide that indeed some people do not have dignity, are not worthy of having their life protected because we want to say they are of no value, is where we find a lot of great injustices in our country. We saw this with African Americans, you see it with the unborn, and it all goes back to rejecting the fact that all of us are made in the image and likeness of God.
What about Catholics? I mean, what role can Catholics play right now as we look at the troubles that people have in the world right now, as we look at the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.?
Well, I think Catholics have a big role to play in that. I think we don't pray enough, honestly. I think sometimes we think that the only action we can take is one that is political or legislative, but I think we need to take recourse to the creator of all things. We need to take recourse to God. I, of course, would recommend more time in adoration and asking God to also change us interiorly where we are falling down and where we have certain blind spots. I think that would be a very initial start that we could do that.
Adoration, prayer. I know fasting is a part of the tradition as well. As Our Lady of Fatima said, prayer and fasting, and Jesus said, you know, you have to go for fasting.
I agree with that 100%, and I think we haven't done enough of that for the sin of racism in this country. I know our bishops have just started a committee on racism, and I would love to see us get together as Catholics in the United States and maybe try to do something in terms of reparation for the sin of racism, for slavery, for Jim Crow, all of those things. And I think it would go a long way toward healing those wounds that still exist.
Let's go pray for that. Gloria Purvis, host of EWTN Radio's Morning Glory. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The Trump administration releases a pregnant immigrant teen who says she was stopped from getting an abortion while in federal custody. That gives her the chance now to go through with an abortion. The Trump administration said Sunday in a court filing the 17-year-old now is with a sponsor, usually an adult who's a family member. She's the fourth pregnant immigrant teenager to ask for an abortion. A judge allowed the first three to do so. And mourners in California light candles at a temporary memorial for the victims of last week's deadly mudslide. The mudslides killed at least 20 people. 4 are still missing. California leaders say this week they hope to reopen a major highway. US 101 has been closed for nearly a week since debris choked all lanes, toppled trees, and crushed cars. The transgender former Army intelligence analyst who goes by Chelsea Manning is running for the U.S. Senate in Maryland. He'll likely challenge two-term Democratic Senator Ben Cardin in the primaries. Manning was convicted of leaking more than 700,000 documents to WikiLeaks. President Obama granted him clemency. Up next, the Pope and migrants. A Vatican leader breaks down the Holy Father's challenge to the world. And a papal honor. We look at the rich history of the U.S.'s newest basilica, including its famous first donor. The Catholic Church today remembers St. Paul of Thebes. His life of solitude and penance gave inspiration to the monastic movement during its early years. He lived to be well over 100 years old. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jason Calvi in for Lauren Ashburn. Pope Francis says it's a sin if fear makes us hostile to refugees and immigrants. The Holy Father preached at Mass in St. Peter's Basilica on Sunday, a day the Church dedicated to migrants. Several thousand immigrants were there. The Pope also said new arrivals must know and respect the laws, the culture, and the traditions of the countries that take them in. Father Michael Czerny is Undersecretary of the Vatican's new section for migrants and refugees. He joins us now from Rome. Father Czerny, you were at the Mass yesterday. Tell us more about what the Holy Father is asking all of us in our local communities.
He's asking us to recognize the people who are coming for different reasons, some of them because of being attracted to our societies, others because they're fleeing from terrible conditions at home, and to discover how by meeting them and sharing life with them, both they and we will grow, both they and we have a chance to encounter Christ.
And this has been a common theme we've seen throughout the Pope's 5 years. The Holy Father has stressed again and again the Catholic Church's mission to welcome the vulnerable, to welcome the marginalized people from around the world. But what about the challenges that governments face? I'm thinking of, in particular, the idea of protecting your borders and security. So how do you balance that with the openness that the Holy Father is also talking about?
Well, that's exactly government's job. Their job is to maintain security, but never at the cost of human dignity. You cannot sacrifice people for the sake of national security. You have to use all your resources, your intelligence, your traditions, your laws, to make sure that as you protect your borders, as you insist on procedures, that nevertheless the dignity, the human rights, especially of those who are most vulnerable, are never violated. And that's the standard, and there are no shortcuts. That's the job of government.
And it's a very, very difficult job.
It's really not that difficult. I think that if government encourages communities to be welcoming, to be open, they'll find that there isn't nearly as much of a problem as seems to get generated. And then the government can do its job in terms of border security, but it's society, it's communities, it's parishes that are actually doing the welcoming and the integrating of the new arrivals.
And is there any other practical examples that people can do at the parish level, for example, to welcome these migrants?
Oh, sure. There's so much to be done, beginning with finding decent housing, opening one's own home, or setting up housing where they can get a first start. Assuring education, language training, helping them to learn about the health system, making sure that they're getting the support and the protection, but also the services that they need. All you have to do is put yourself in their shoes and ask yourself, what would I need if I landed in some strange place where I didn't speak the language and I had no family?
Well, Father Michael Czerny, thank you so much for being on the newscast tonight. I hope we can have you on again, the new Undersecretary of the Vatican's new section for migrants and refugees. Thank you so much.
Good night. Thank you.
And finally tonight, a 223-year-old Catholic church in Northern Virginia outside Washington makes history, and it's all thanks to the Vatican.
It is my privilege today to announce to you historic and joyous news that honors the Diocese of Arlington, the parish of St. Mary, and the city of Alexandria.
The Holy See names St. Mary's Catholic Church a minor basilica. It'll be called the Basilica of St. Mary. It was the first Catholic church in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Its first donor was George Washington. The parish moved to its current location in 1810. That does it for tonight's show. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. For the entire EWTN Nightly team, I'm Jason Calvi. Good night and God bless.